My name is Fuyubi Nakamura. I'm curator for the exhibition Entangled Territories, Tibet Through Images, which is currently on view at the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia, known as MOA. I work as a curator for Asia at the MOA and also associate professor in the Department of Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia, or UBC. The exhibition Entangled Territories, Tibet Through Images reimagines Tibet by showing how Tibet has historically been represented by outsiders and how Tibetans themselves now present and talk about Tibet. By collaborating with Tibetan Canadian community members and artists, the exhibition showcases Tibet and Tibetans through their lenses and voices. Since visiting Dharamshala in India, where the Tibetan government exile is based, 30 years ago in 1995, and then Tibet in 2010, and Nepal in 2012, the Himalaya region has remained one of my areas of research interests for many years. I am thrilled to have this opportunity to curate and collaborate with Tibetan Canadian community members and artists to produce an exhibition about Tibet here at the MOA in Vancouver. Joining me today is Dr. Tsering Shakya, my collaborator and my dear colleague, who is an associate professor in the Department of Asian Studies and School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tsering.
Thank you for you. Great to see you.
Okay, so our relationship actually goes back over 20 years when we both worked on the project called the Tibet Album, British Photography in Central Tibet 1920 to 1950 at the Pitt Rivers Museum at the University of Oxford, as this project was led by my graduate supervisor, Tibetan specialist Dr. Claire Harris. And this project actually resulted in the exhibition called Seeing Lhasa. As this collection of actually photographs taken in Tibet by British officers kept at Oxford related to the current exhibition at MOA, Entangled Territories, I'd like you to first ask you to talk about how Tibet has been represented historically by outsiders through such photographs taken by British officers by relating to this project Tibet Album.
Thank you for yes, that's correct. I mean, we go back a long way when we were in Oxford at the Pitt Rivers Museum, and we did the digitization of collections of photographs taken by British officials, from Charles Bell to Hugh Richardson. There's an extensive collection of photographs which now are available for anyone to see. And one of the unique thing with Professor Claire Harris and initiative was to get this out in the public, and the people will identify the people in these photographs. Because many of these photographs have been produced in, say, National Geographic and other geographical magazines in the 1930s and 40s, and they always had sort of generic name, Tibetan nobleman or Tibetan Lama. There's no names of individuals. So these are very influential and significant figures in Tibetan history, and you just can't call them Tibetan noblemen. You have, these are identifiable people. So Claire Harris, Professor Harris, and we identified each of the people in the photograph. Secondly, also identified the location of all these photos were taken, date and time, and we wrote the biographies of each of these individuals who appear in the photograph. Because these photos were taken by British elite or photos of Tibetan elite. This is what you have, Tibetan aristocracy, that way. And where sort of the two sort of sets of elite mingled and met, photograph. So in that, when we release that sort of public, and people can identify it, and then actually the public actually added information about saying, oh, this is my uncle, this is this place. So we had actually really good documentation of these photographs that way. And similarly, the photographs in the UBC Museum also is donated by Eric Parker, who was one of the colonial officers who actually was trained Tibetan soldiers in 1930s and 40s, and it was based in Yangtze. And also Eric Parker was sort of a contemporary of people like Charles Bell and Hugh Richardson. So they're quite familiar with that group. So sometimes it's very hard to know about the, whereas Richardson, Bell, we know that this is their photograph. They took the photograph. We have the glass negatives in that way. Whereas Eric Parker's one, we don't have many negatives that way. These photographs would be like today, we send copies to each other. So other people will take copies and then they will print and they distribute copies. Some of the copies that we have could be reprint or taken by others, but actually, but Eric Parker does have a quite unique set of photographs of Tibet in 1930s and 40s that way. So it is still, many of the British colonial officers, after they retired from their Indian services, actually Charles Bell retired in British Columbia, and he's buried in Vancouver Island. So Eric Parker is similar. He retired from British colonial service and retired to Vancouver Island. So there's whole sort of history of British colonial officers after retirement moving to British Columbia. And that's another sort of interesting exchange in that, why the materials end up here.
Yeah, actually, both of them passed away in Victoria, as far as I know. So yes, on Vancouver Island. And actually, the Eric Parkers, we do have negatives, not just prints, but we don't actually know whether all the photos are taken by him. You are right. And then, as you mentioned, the one at the Peterborough Museum, most of the photographs, people could identify who are in the photo, but we haven't got to that stage to do research this collection properly. So that might be the next project we can think about doing together.
Yeah,
But,
I think so that is possible. Today, once we digitize them and make it available to all over, and Tibetans or older families will be looking at this photo and say, oh, this is my uncle or this is my cousin. So we might be able to do that. Oh, I have this photo at home. So this is one way that is, because other thing, what I find is sort of very interesting is there's a lot of sort of anthropological writing about which is a very exoticized, stereotyped, and I think almost sort of condescending way where Tibetans are described as fear or being taken photograph, they'll hide, and they think this if you take photo, life will be shortened. There's all that the anthropologists have written like that, and even contemporary anthropologists, well-known anthropologists, write about that. Actually, they are totally, in fact, they're just ignorance and lack of knowledge. In fact, since 1900, there were photo studios in Lhasa. In fact, now I'm discovering there were 3 photo studios in Lhasa where the families went and have their photographs taken. And, this archive still exists in private family homes today. So actually, this idea that this technology was so new and people were frightened of it, and then no, actually, the Tibetans were really engaged with the photography. Reason because of the Cultural Revolution and what happened in China, many families were talked to. Yes, we had a huge collection of photos, but we had to burn it because it will be photograph will be seen as being decadent or implicated with the imperialists. So they just burned all their photographs.
Actually, so our Eric Parker collection is already available digitally, so we can really think about engaging more Tibetan community members to identify the people in the photo. But as you know, this particular collection caught the interest of one of the artists in the exhibition, Kun Sang-kyung. So she actually came to research this archival, photograph and also letters by Eric Parker at the MOA. And she actually produced a new film called Letters from Tibet using
Yeah.
those archival material. So what do you think of her film? What do you think, of this film? I hope you had a chance to watch Kun-san's film, Letters from
Mm.
Tibet.
Yes, actually, I'm a sort of big admirer of Kun San's work, and I've
Mm,
seen,
mm,
just now her film Hundred Sunset,
mm,
which is achieving sort of global recognition and
mm,
been shown in Japan and in Brazil and the Vancouver Film Festival,
mm,
and being invited even to show in film festivals in China. So he's
mm,
getting incredible recognition.
mm,
And the film she did made for Momo is really interesting
mm,
because I noticed in some extent, so someone like her and the second generation diaspora,
mm,
Tibet is very intimate, their family, their friends, they
mm,
come. But the distant past of
mm,
Tibet, history of Tibet, is something you view through a lens. You're viewing, you are watching through stuff. So what you saw in Quinson's film is she's sort of viewing Tibet through the lens of camera. She is viewing
mm,
it. She's
mm,
not
mm,
there. She doesn't never been to Tibet. She
mm,
doesn't know the past. So she notices how sort of Eric Parker described the landscape in the
mm,
letters. How dreary that is, right? It's
mm,
barren it is.
mm,
So she noticed that, and she sort of takes it in through her film and her
mm,
depiction in the film, and is to say, trying to draw the imagining of
mm,
Tibet as a very vast and barren land.
mm,
That she does that, and that's I think it's quite interesting for third and second generation
mm,
community. How do we look at the past? How do we understand the history of Tibet? How do we feel the landscape? you
mm,
know,
mm,
and that can only be done through photography and the
mm,
pictures.
mm,
That's why I think there's a sort of a need to look at the old pictures and say, oh,
mm,
that's what it used to be. Because today, in fact, this monastery may exist today and they're still there, but actually the texture of the
mm.
landscape and the color is not the same.
Right.
Now they use modern paints and things on
Yeah,
the wood, and
sure.
color is similar
Mm,
but not the same.
mm,
So what you have is through looking through this lens, what Kristen does is sort of
mm,
views Tibet
mm,
as she can, as closely as she can get to uh, authentic Tibet of the past.
right.
And I see that sort of her traveling, and she's sort of
Mm,
got most struck by where Eric Parker has sort of strange sort of relationship with the land, because
mm,
one level he sees as a very dreary, boring landscape and dreary in the letters,
mm,
and also his depiction
mm,
of photography is not as like close up, sort of like
mm,
shot in a film. It
mm,
is always very broad, vast landscape.
mhm.
It's always is his photographs are always very panoramic sort of things. It's not
Yeah.
close up. It's a portrait
Mm,
thing. So Kusan does that in her films also. She always
mm,
has the way to position camera as
mm,
though you are looking at the whole scene. You're not
right.
looking at the individual character.
Mm, mm,
She does
mm,
that really well in that she tells them as a viewer, we are looking at every part of the corner of the screen,
yeah.
because there might be
Mm.
things we need to see in that screen. So I thought her film was a really good use of photography and
Mm,
also contemporary mediums,
mm,
and looking at say, of course, she incorporates Hollywood, like the Frank Capra's Lost Horizon
yeah.
in there.
Mm,
And
mm,
so this way, sort of, it's the what is it sort of are the photographs a reportage of
mm,
real place,
mhm,
as opposed to Frank Capra's Lost Horizon?
mm,
This is made up. When you mingle the two together,
mm,
and she does it really well. I thought the film was nicely done. And this is where a second, third generation Tibetan is
mm.
viewing at these photographs.
Right. It's very interesting. Kun-san is interesting archive photograph. So she actually also went to Pitt Rivers Museum to
Yeah,
study their photographic collection too.
yeah,
And as
yeah,
far as I know, she kind of started making different film using their collection, but I
yeah,
don't think it's complete yet. But it's great that you shared so much about her film. Yeah, I'm very
yeah,
happy she actually, created this film for the
yeah,
exhibition.
yeah,
So, in addition to Kun-san's work, we also have, the works by another artist, Rodu Lola. Apart from like in a photographic series, she also decided to showcase one particular work called 169. This work is about self-immolation. And you wrote back in 2012, let me just quote you. You wrote, under Chinese occupation, quote, there is a sensible impossibility for many Tibetans in terms of making meaningful life. And this desperation is a root cause of self-immolation in Tibet. So can you please speak about this particular practice and the situation inside Tibet? Maybe also in relation to Lord's work, 169, why you thought about her work and how this work actually presents this practice and situation.
Mm. Of course, the self-immolation as a form of protest is just, I would say, not something Tibetan invented. I mean,
Mm,
it happened with Falun Gong,
mm,
and it's happened in the Arab Spring. It's
mm,
all that. It's just a unique and horrifying form
mm,
of protest. And the Tibetans, what
mm,
I should say, in the reason why Tibetans are doing it, it's uh, if you look at Tibet from 1980s, there
mm,
had been numerous protests.
right.
Every year there's a major protest. When these protests happen, people get arrested, they're detained, they're tortured, they're imprisoned. There's such a violence, state violence is inflicted on protesters that
Mm,
way. Secondly, so the Chinese sort of system of surveillance so now virtually makes it
mm,
impossible to stage a public protest in
mm,
that way. So you have actual practicality of
mm,
staging a protest is very less because of surveillance there.
right.
And secondly, is sort of the consequence that the state really can punish you, can torture your body and punish you that way. Now, with the self-immolation is another form of tactic when Tibetans adopted. And the reason is that a single person, a monk or nun or male or female, just going to a market square and setting them on fire is very harder to police. There's no way
Mm,
to police it. You don't know who's going to do that.
mm,
Of course, they have done many strategies to prevent it, but it's very hard to. And so this became the
mm,
sort of way of to do the form of protest. And with this, hundreds and nearly, I think, over 200 people have self-immolated. So this is uh, um, horroring, and I think this resonated with people like Lorde and younger generations who grew up in, they're born in exile, they're born in
mm,
Canada or anywhere. That idea of people protesting in the homeland
mm,
really impacted them so much.
mm,
So Lottie is looking at them, and Lottie is cautions so much about who are these people
mm,
and how are they related to me and
mm,
where am I in that
mm,
question. So only thing we have is these sort of blurry pictures, photos we have, and we only have numbers. Sometimes we don't even remember their names, that individual
mm,
in that way. So her photograph is very similar. Like you find that in everywhere where this kind of tragic, like say in Cambodia, Pol Pot's regime, where there are also waterful
mm,
photographs of people who were exterminated, and
mhm,
similarly in concentration camps and everything. So here, Lottie just had to fill the wall with these pictures, but these pictures are not completely clear. These are
mm,
just sort of out of focus, not fully sort
mm,
of, not quite. We know it's a person, but it's
mm,
not quite the sort of recognizable face from Disney. You really have to go
mm,
close to see
mm,
what the picture is about. So I think forcing us to look really close into that picture is in a way of saying, look, who's this person? What is this person doing? And she does it very successfully to, I think this is what Tibetan diaspora who born in Canada, never been to Tibet. This is just really painful way of remembering their own condition of being a diasporic Tibetan.
Yes, great, because she actually just, have the names of the people and the dates they actually kill themselves. So she really tried to present them as individuals, not just random people. So that's the kind of relationship she had. She collected those photographs from the Tibetan activists and advocacy groups. So she had a quite a lot of relationship with the people she worked with. So I think it's a very important work to have in the exhibition. Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing. And now the next question, actually, in the publication that accompany the exhibition, you wrote about the politics of naming, which is fantastic essay, and how Chinese government has been trying to rename Tibet. So can you please share with us why the name Tibet must stand?
This is a political name is just, it's so important to us living in BC, in Vancouver. Just I'm in Vancouver, and we just had, I'm next to a street called Trach, and we just got renamed. The Trach had such a horrific memory for the indigenous community here, yet his name being lined as a street name and being constant reminder of their colonial sort of evilness that inflicted on the First Nation, is there. So do we erase that name as recognized and replace it with the, it's now called masculine view and the sort of indigenous name. So, Tibet Must Stand is actually what I had wrote this blog and post, but also our questions of naming is it comes out with the much bigger questions happening all over. How to deal with the colonial past and the present realities. That do we look at the colonial past as glorification of great achievement, or do we not reflect on the suffering it's inflicted on people? So in Tibet, in what is happening, so what our names and our place names are made to fit, I would say, pleasing to the Chinese tongue, because there are a lot of names they cannot pronounce or cannot say. And even our names, individual personal names, when it's rendered in Chinese and what character they use to choose to render it, and they always do so in very negative characters. And other Tibetan anthropologists have written about that topic. And I think other way is actually certain agro-colonial rulers also trying to erase history. The Chinese government at the moment actively are trying to promote a notion that the name Tibet, as we understood today globally, is a foreign name, and it doesn't imply. The great fear is when people talk about Tibet, it conjures up completely different. It's conscious of a sovereign people. It does not include China. It does not have a modern nation state. China is not included in the notion of Tibet. In some ways, this reflects the Tibetan indigenous view of themselves, because when we say Gemi, China, we are never including ourselves in that. There's no way in the Tibetan language we can find word of a name of a nation or place where Tibetan and Chinese are included as singular people. No, we do not. When we say Gemi or Jana, it's completely separate. We are not in that. So this is what the Chinese state really fears, that the use of this name globally accentuates and amplifies the Tibetan identity and Tibet as separate idea. So this is why they wanted to rename it as Xizang. That is actually Xizang. Again, there's a lot of misunderstanding, abuse of the term. Firstly, Tibet does not come from Turkic or Arabic term. It comes from Chinese mispronunciation of per. When we go back to Tang, pi is not pronounced in different way, which is rendered. So it's become Tobo. Tobo was taken by Arabs and it's later taken by Western, and it was become Tibet region. So you can go back to the root to Chinese mispronunciation of per. That's one. And a notion also, the Xizang, well, is often is translated as that the treasure of the West or something like treasure house of the West, but which is, again, is wrong that way. Is what is really, Chinese were trying to render the term, Tibetan term, Yuzang, central Zang. That was where it was Yuzang. Xizang doesn't mean anything. It just, again, phonetically rendered as Xizang, but it refers to Tibet. So, main idea that name is problem is that Tibetan sort of by itself, naming itself, it implies something independent, sovereign people, sovereign nation. It does not include us. So China has to find a way of including Tibet in China.
Right, because you also wrote that, the government has been kind of, pressurizing like museums and some institutions to rename how they call Tibet too, right? Some museum in Europe and, elsewhere.
Also, what happened in France is, Chinese state refused to loan art objects if they continue to use the term Tibet. So now many of the museums, they're trying to use euphemism like Himalayan art object or something like that, rather than say you use Tibet.
So at least we still call Tibet here at the MOA.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
No, because I think this kind of thing is indigenous tradition, indigenous right, and it has a much stronger meaning within Canadian history and politics and contemporary Canadian settings.
So I hope people here understand the importance of keeping this name Tibet.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, when I first talked to you about my idea for doing the exhibition about Tibet at the MOA, and they wanted to collaborate with Tibetan community, you really wanted me to work with a younger generation. Therefore, you introduced me to the students from Lodre Kumpel Tibetan Language School here in Vancouver. And those students became my collaborators, for the exhibition. So what do you think those students go out working on these exhibitions? What is your also hope for the younger generation of Tibetans?
There are a number of ways we can think about that, where the Tibet, because of course, one of the key questions that today museum face is how to decolonize, how to indigenize museums, how to do that, and also how to museums liaise with the communities that it's located with. And what is interesting, what we said beginning when you thought about the exhibition and how to do it, and I was really happy that we should get the community involved in selecting the items or what to display. Museum, and what is really interesting thing is you ask each of the Tibetan participants and our, all diaspora communities, not all, many diaspora communities have like Sunday weekend language schools, before our children to go and learn Tibetan, and they do that. So it was also opportunity for them to come to a museum and be authority on the objects and say, select the item and trying to explain what it means to them. So what they have is certain sort of objects, something at home like the damaru or teapot or all these things. These are objects are not alien. They're all there. They see it every day, their grandparents and the home, but also same time, it is a museum object. So they resonate with this object. Oh yeah, that's my uncle, or that's my father. They all wrote how this object was selected. So in this process, I think we really got a number of layered way in which we work to say, firstly, how do you get community involved? Secondly, how do we display objects and explain meanings? And it's not because when you display object by external body, it is always exoticized and something unique, something horrifying. When natives sort of trying to display the object, they do so through certain familiarity, certain intimacy, and that exoticization disappears in that way. It's sort of uniqueness. It's there, and also it tells you a little something about their own aesthetics and what they find interesting. So if you go through the exhibition and people visit and read the catalog, each of our, high school children explains why they selected this object and how this object related to them in a way. So either there's an element of curiosity, but at the same time there is an element of sort of familiarity and intimacy.
I think they are actually also very proud to be part of the exhibition. They look very proud at the opening.
Yes, that is absolutely true. When we did, when they came to the exhibition and they were all pointing to what they did and things like, actually exhibition, one teacher was at there and she immediately told me, my God, our school doesn't know that these kids been doing this. So we can, she was texting the school saying, oh my God, our school kids have been doing this and they've got exhibition here and they've written this. So this is thing. So it's the schools were proud that their children have been working on a project which is totally unknown to them. This is because it wasn't sort of school project, it was our community project, that's known. And they wrote about it, that was so. And this, for the students, when they all stood by the exhibition, they were very proud because it's sort of validation, of their work and validation, recognition that you did something work and which is now in an important museum. So that is really sort of validated. And they were very happy. You can see that on the day of
they
the
were very
opening.
happy. But so thank you so much for introducing me to them, Tsering. So lastly,
I'm really happy how it worked out anyway.
So lastly, I just would like to ask if there's anything else you'd like to share with us about Tibet or the exhibition.
I think exhibition was really great success and you've done amazing job. And I'm really pleased how your set designers and how it was displayed. And other important thing that people will not immediately notice is everything is bilingual. We had the exhibition title to the catalog to the caption, everything. We did it bilingual. In that way, and we had great translators who worked on it, and we made sure it reflects the Tibetan voice. So I think it was really amazing that we had all our captions in bilingual.
Thank you for actually mentioning that. I forgot to mention that aspect, but it's very important aspect of the exhibition. So you're right.
Yeah, that's what's really good. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tsering, for joining and sharing your thoughts and the view with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations anyway.
Thank you.